Well, hello and welcome to our continuing devotional. We're currently going through the book of Ephesians, and we're left off at Ephesians chapter 3, verse 7. So let's go ahead and pick up there where the Apostle Paul is speaking about this wonderful plan that God has that opens up the opportunity and salvation through Jesus for everyone, that is not limited to one specific group, that you don't have to become Jewish in order to be saved. You don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to go through all of these rituals and works, but rather we become God's people through the work of Jesus Christ, through his sacrifice, sacrificial death on the cross, and through his resurrection. And that's called the good news. That's called the gospel. And after speaking about that in verses 1 through 6 and that great mystery of what God had always planned, Paul begins to speak about himself in verse 7, where he says this, Ephesians 3, verse 7, "Of this gospel I was made a minister, according to the gift of God's grace, which was given me by the working of his power." So the Apostle Paul is absolutely humbled, as we all should be, that God would use him. He goes, "Of this good news I was made a servant." I was called to proclaim this good news to others, not because I had earned it. I didn't earn this privilege. I didn't deserve this privilege. But God in his grace and in his power took a broken, weak, messed up man like myself and is now using me, of all people, to proclaim the good news to other people. Paul is astounded, as we should be astounded, that not only has God saved us, but now God uses us. And recognizing our own fallibility, our own failures, our own sins, our own struggles, our own unfaithfulness, and we see all of that in ourselves, we should be absolutely amazed that God is so gracious and so powerful that he can take people like us and use us to spread his glory and his graciousness. That's why Paul says in verse 8, "To me, although I am the least of all the saints, this grace was given to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to bring to light for everyone what is the plan of the mystery of God, hidden for ages in God who created all things." And the emphasis here is on the phrase "to me." To me, Paul had the attitude toward himself that we all should have, that I am the least. Not necessarily an attitude in which we're always berating ourselves, but the recognition that there's nothing in us that has merited or deserved God's love and his grace. It should astound us that God blesses us and uses us, because we really all fit in that category of the least of all the saints. And yet that grace was given to us to proclaim the greatness, the unsearchable riches of Christ and his plan that opens up the door for everyone who will come to Christ to be saved. That's awesome that God would use people like you and me for that. We should never think that somehow God owes us for doing that, but rather we should be astounded that God allows us. He doesn't need us. He allows us to share in the privilege by his grace. He takes weak, broken people and he says, "I will use you to proclaim the good news about Christ, my great mystery. I will use you to share that with others." He goes on to explain what God is doing through the gospel and through saving people from all over the world. He says in verse 10 that so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might be made known to the rulers and to the authorities in heavenly places. So he's saying God is showing, I don't know if the word showing off would be correct, because that kind of has negative connotations. But God is showing his greatness, his power, his mercy, his goodness. And how does God show all of these things to the angels and to the demons and to the world at large? How does God show these things and make and show his great wisdom? He shows it through the church. He shows it through, and the church is us. God displays his power, his wisdom, his grace by how he's working in us. And all of this, according to verse 11, was according to his eternal purpose that's now been realized through the working of Jesus Christ. And through Jesus, it says in verse 12, we have boldness and access with confidence through our faith in him. So because of Jesus, now we can come to God not afraid in an unhealthy sense, not saying that God's going to reject us, but now we can come with confidence that God will receive us. Us, sinners, broken, messed up, breaking our promises, not keeping our vows, struggling to live daily righteously, and we can come boldly and confidently to the throne of God because of Jesus, as it says there in verse 12. In him we have boldness and access with confidence through our faith in him. So he says in verse 13, so I ask that you not lose heart over what I'm suffering for you, which is for your glory. He says, don't get discouraged. Yeah, there's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of heartache. But in all of it, God is displaying his wisdom and his glory. And besides all of that, he is astounded that God has chosen people like us to use us in all of our weakness and all of our fallibility. God is gracious toward us. I hope you will consider these things. Have a blessed day.